Zimbabwe is a landlocked country in Southeast Africa, positioned between two major river systems, the Zambezi to the north and the Limpopo to the south. It borders South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, and Mozambique, placing it at a crossroads of southern African trade, migration, and politics. Today, its capital and largest city is Harare, while Bulawayo remains an important urban and cultural center in the southwest. With a population estimated at around 17.3 million people, Zimbabwe is not one of Africa's largest countries by land area or population, but its history has given it an outsized place in the continent's story. To understand Zimbabwe, you have to look beyond modern borders. Its identity was shaped by ancient stone cities, powerful African kingdoms, British colonial rule, a long liberation war, and the dramatic political and economic changes that followed independence. Zimbabwe's society is deeply multilingual and multi-ethnic, though two broad groups dominate its population. The Shona and Northern Ndebele, together with closely related communities, make up the vast majority of Zimbabweans. Shona languages are widely spoken across much of the country, while Ndebele is especially important in the southwest, around Bulawayo and Matabeleland. English also plays a major role, particularly in government, education, law, and formal business. Zimbabwe officially recognizes 16 languages, reflecting a society more diverse than a simple ethnic map might suggest. Language here is not just communication, it is linked to memory, identity, and power. Colonial rule elevated English, independence revived African political identity, and local languages continue to carry oral histories, family structures, songs, and regional loyalties that shape everyday life. Long before Zimbabwe existed as a modern state, the region was home to the San, whose presence across southern Africa stretches back thousands of years. Around 2,000 years ago, Bantu-speaking peoples began settling in the area, bringing new forms of agriculture, ironworking, cattle keeping, and settled village life. These migrations were not a single event, but a long process of movement, exchange, and adaptation. Over time, communities developed political systems connected to farming, mining, and trade. Gold, cattle, and control over trade routes became sources of wealth and authority. This early period is important because it challenges the outdated idea that complex states in southern Africa only appeared after European arrival. In reality, the foundations of organized power, commerce, and urban life in Zimbabwe were already developing centuries earlier. Beginning around the 11th century, Shona-speaking communities built what became one of Africa's most remarkable historic sites, Great Zimbabwe. Its massive stone walls, constructed without mortar, still stand as evidence of architectural skill, social organization, and political authority. By the 13th century, Great Zimbabwe had become a major center of power and trade. It was connected to wider Indian Ocean commerce through routes that linked the interior to the East African coast. Gold, ivory, and other goods moved outward, while imported beads, ceramics, and luxury items moved inward. The site was not just a fortress or palace, it was a symbol of legitimacy. Its name, often interpreted as meaning stone houses or houses of stone, eventually gave the modern country its name after independence. The influence of Great Zimbabwe did not end with the city's decline. Its political and cultural legacy fed into later states, including the Kingdom of Zimbabwe, the Mutapa Empire, and the Rozvi Empire. These powers controlled land, trade, tribute networks, and sacred authority across parts of present-day Zimbabwe and neighboring regions. The Mutapa state, in particular, became known to Portuguese traders and chroniclers after Europeans expanded along the southeastern African coast. This contact brought commerce, diplomacy, and conflict, but African rulers were not passive participants. They negotiated, resisted, and adapted as outside interests grew. The history of these kingdoms shows that pre-colonial Zimbabwe was part of a dynamic regional world, where African states competed for wealth and influence long before the colonial scramble redrew the map. European imperial pressure intensified in the late 19th century, as Britain and Portugal competed over territory in southern and central Africa. Portugal had imagined a vast zone connecting Angola and Mozambique, sometimes associated with the so-called Pink Map. Britain opposed those ambitions, and after diplomatic pressure, British influence expanded in the region that would become Rhodesia. Cecil Rhodes and his British South Africa Company played a central role. In 1890, company forces moved into Mashonaland, and in 1893 they conquered Matabeleland after the First Matabele War. The region was named Rhodesia after Rhodes, reflecting how colonial conquest often transformed African lands into private or imperial projects. This was not simply a change of administration, it meant land seizure, new taxes, labor demands, and the violent restructuring of political power. Company rule ended in 1923, when Southern Rhodesia became a self-governing British colony. But self-government did not mean democracy for the African majority. Political power was concentrated in the hands of the white settler minority, which controlled land, voting rights, and state institutions. Africans faced severe restrictions on political participation and economic opportunity. Land policies pushed many black Zimbabweans into poorer rural reserves, while the most fertile areas and commercial farming zones were dominated by settlers. This unequal system created deep grievances that would later fuel nationalist politics and armed resistance. Southern Rhodesia was not identical to apartheid South Africa, but it shared a broader regional pattern, a settler minority using law, force, and economic control to maintain dominance over the indigenous majority. In 1965, Southern Rhodesia's white minority government made a dramatic move by unilaterally declaring independence from Britain, creating the state commonly known as Rhodesia. The declaration was designed to preserve minority rule at a time when decolonization was sweeping across Africa. Britain did not recognize the move, and Rhodesia faced international isolation and sanctions. Inside the country, African nationalist movements increasingly turned toward armed struggle. What followed was a long guerrilla war, often called the Rhodesian Bush War or the Second Kimurenga. Black liberation forces fought against the Rhodesian state, while civilians were caught between military campaigns, forced relocations, and political violence. The conflict lasted roughly 15 years and made clear that the old political order could not survive indefinitely. The war ended through negotiations that led to a peace settlement and internationally recognized independence in April 1980. The new country took the name Zimbabwe, linking modern sovereignty to the historic stone city of Great Zimbabwe. Robert Mugabe became prime minister after elections, and the moment was celebrated across Africa as another victory over colonial and minority rule. For many Zimbabweans, independence promised majority government, land reform, education, healthcare expansion, and national dignity after decades of exclusion. The early years saw real gains in literacy and public services. But independence also brought difficult questions. How should power be shared? How should colonial land inequality be corrected? How could former enemies be integrated into one state? These unresolved tensions would shape Zimbabwe's political future. Robert Mugabe's rule became one of the defining chapters in Zimbabwe's modern history. Initially prime minister, he became president in 1987 after the country shifted from its initial parliamentary system toward a stronger presidential model. Over time, his government became increasingly authoritarian. The security apparatus played a major role in politics, and human rights groups accused the state of widespread abuses. Political opposition, civil society, journalists, and critics often faced intimidation or repression. Mugabe remained a powerful anti-colonial symbol to some supporters, especially because of his role in the liberation struggle and his rhetoric against Western influence. But for many Zimbabweans and international observers, his legacy became tied to political violence, concentration of power, contested elections, and the narrowing of democratic space. Zimbabwe's economy experienced a severe decline from the late 1990s through 2008. Several factors contributed, including political instability, controversial land seizures, falling investor confidence, sanctions, corruption, and weaknesses in state management. The most famous symbol of this crisis was hyperinflation. Prices rose so quickly that the Zimbabwean dollar became nearly unusable, and banknotes with enormous denominations entered circulation. Ordinary people saw savings vanish, wages lose meaning, and basic goods become difficult to afford. Many Zimbabweans left the country in search of work, especially to South Africa and the United Kingdom. Eventually, the government permitted the use of foreign currencies, which helped stabilize parts of the economy. But the crisis left deep scars in public trust, employment, infrastructure, and household security. In 2017, after years of economic hardship and more than a year of protests and political tension, Zimbabwe reached another turning point. A military intervention pressured Robert Mugabe to resign, ending his 37 years in power. Emmerson Mnangagwa, a longtime figure within the ruling party, became president. The transition raised hopes that Zimbabwe might enter a new era of reform, investment, and political opening. But it also raised questions, because Mnangagwa came from within the same political system that had ruled since independence. Zimbabwe today remains a country of contrasts, rich in history, minerals, agricultural potential, educated citizens, and cultural resilience, yet still facing challenges of governance, currency stability, unemployment, and political trust. Its story is not simply one of decline or triumph. It is the story of a nation still negotiating the meaning of sovereignty, justice, and renewal. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.